in an effort to attract middle-class workers downtown to live, because folks, back in the day, nobody wanted to live in downtown Chicago. Most people just worked down here, so Bertrand designed these two buildings like a city inside of a city. On the inside, there was a roller rink, a grocery store, a doctor's office, a movie theater, a bowling alley, basically every accommodation you could need or want to live downtown. Now, the most common questions I get about these two buildings: one, what do the apartments look like on the inside? Got a weird answer for you there. A slice of pie, entry the pointing intros outwards towards the balcony. And the other common question I get: has anybody ever driven off of a parking lot before? Yes, 3 times. Twice for a movie, once for an advertisement, nobody got hurt. The 2 movies, Steve McQueen's second to last film, The Hunter, and the Blues Brothers. They drove a car off of both of those. Then the Allstate Insurance Company in the early 2000s drove a car halfway up the building, hung the car on the side, and put an Allstate billboard underneath that, sort of showing the worst case scenario for a vehicle in Chicago for their insurance company. Also, yes, they're the 2 buildings from that one Wilco album and the Bob Newhart show. Now, past the bridge, we have a shorter red brick building called the Reed Murdoch Center, built 1914 by George Nimmons. We are going to play a game with this one. I'm going to give you guys 3 seconds to look all around this building. At the end of those 3 seconds, I'm going to ask you what's weird about it. Now, if you already know the answer, don't say anything to the end of those 3 seconds. Also, here's a hint. The weird thing I'm looking for is not the fact that the building is made of bricks. Are y'all ready? 3 seconds and go. 3, 2, 1. What's weird about it? Y'all yelling out if you noticed. You got it right. Look at the clock tower. Count the columns of windows to the right of the clock tower. There are 6. Look to the left of the clock tower and count the columns of windows. There's only 5. The entire building is asymmetrical. The clock tower's not in the middle of it. Why? That building was built in 1914. This bridge was built in the 1930s. Whenever they put this bridge in, they had to extend out that street there to put in the bridge house, and they knocked down that column of windows. So the Reed Murdoch Center building wasn't always asymmetrical. Now, right next to us here, we have 300 North and South, designed by Picard and Schulten in 2009. This building is one of the most environmentally friendly buildings in Chicago. It was built with over 60% recycled materials, and would you guys believe me if I told you, no air conditioning units in this building. No one is suffering in there during the summertime. The way they cool the building off is using river water. They pump it in through the walls, pump it out cleaner than it actually already was. But I'm apprehensive to share that one with you because it may no longer be true, because that process heats the water up, and that can negatively affect the wildlife in the river. And we do have wildlife in this river. Over 70 different species of fish live in the Chicago River. Also, not just fish. If you live here, earlier last year, like in the springtime, around this time last year, a turtle went viral. A giant snapping turtle was seen just kind of hanging out the side of the river. People freaked out about it. There was a big online campaign to name the turtle. Eventually, the turtle got named Chunkosaurus. But yeah, we got turtles here too. Going back in time again, 1931, the Marshall Field Corporation, better known today as Macy's, they had 18 warehouse buildings scattered all around Chicago. They wanted to combine them into one building. If you're thinking 18 warehouses into one building, that would be a ridiculously huge building. Well, look to the right. You'd be correct. That ridiculously huge building is called the Merchandise Mart, built in 1931 by Graham Anderson, Probst and White. Whenever that massive Art Deco building was first built, it was the largest concrete building in the country by square feet. Today it's only number 2. Does anybody know what number 1 is now? Big, huge government building. The Pentagon. A lot of people got it right. Now, the Merchandise Mart is over 4.2 million square feet of space, over 8,000 hallway in that building. To the 90s, that building had some zip code. Now on the right, you're going to see an outcrop piece of land right here called Wolf Point. Wolf Point is a very historically significant site in Chicago. This is the land where the first non-native visitors, the names were Marquette and Joliet. This is where they were first brought by the indigenous people, the Potawatomi, when they were brought here in 1673. Now, when the Potawatomi brought Marquette and Joliet here, they kept referring to the land as Chicago. It's where we got our name, Chicago. Now, Marquette and Joliet took the word Chicago as the name of the land, but that was wrong. That was not the name of the land the Potawatomi were saying. The Potawatomi were telling them the natural crop that grew on the land, a medicinal onion. It had a very strong fragrance to it. That is what Chicago means, folks. Chicago roughly translates into smelly onion. That's true. So take that, New York, and be called the Big Apple all day long. But with the smelly onions, go on to Chicago. Now, as we're turning here, next building I'm talking about is right now on the right-hand side, but as we keep turning down the North Branch, it's going to be on our left, is this slightly curved apartment building, very aptly titled the Residencies of River Bend. Designed by James DeStefano in 2001, this building is a great example of something called contextualism in architecture. Contextualism is in architecture whenever you design a building within the context of its surroundings. So simplifying that, the river is bending right here, this building bends with the river, it is contextualized with the river. Now, we're going to stay on the left-hand side here, and let's talk about the rectangular red brick building in front of us with the circular windows towards the top. That is the oldest building we will see on the tour today. It's called Fulton House. It was built in 1889 as a dairy storage warehouse. It got redesigned in the 1980s into an apartment building by the architect named Harry Weiss. Now, an interesting thing that Harry Weiss will do with this building is he adds nautical themes to them, themes involving the ocean and sailing. Now, a few of these nautical themes on Fulton House here, the starfish climbing up the side of the building facing the river, and the porthole-like windows, like windows on a boat towards the top, those are added by Harry Weiss as well. Now, kind of a gross story that comes with this building, whenever it got redesigned into an apartment, they had to pull about 500 truckloads of matted cork and horsehair out of the 4-foot-thick walls of the building. That's because the building was an old dairy storage warehouse. Essentially, this thing was a giant cooler. All that cork and horsehair was used as insulation. They pulled it out whenever the building became residential. Harry Weiss, the nautical themes architect, has another building on the tour today. It's the next one on the left. It is the shorter, triangular-shaped building called the Chicago River Cottages. Again, nautical themes is meant to look like a group of sailboats resting on top of the water. It is 4 homes all connected to one building. Designed by Harry Weiss in the 1980s, each resident, whenever they moved in, they paid about $180,000 each for their cottage. That was in the 1980s. All 4 residents stayed there until about 2 years ago. One moved out, put their cottage up for sale, and sold within a day for $3.6 million. So property value on the river in Chicago has changed quite a bit since the 80s. Another good example of that would be ahead of us on the right. This long building here with the blue paneling on the side of it, it's called the East Bank Club. It's a luxury athletic facility. I like to put that, this is where the jet set go to sweat. It's a super fancy gym. Now, the reason I say this gym is so fancy, a few notable people who have gone here, the Obama family and Oprah Winfrey, have held memberships to this place. But the reason I say it's a good example of how property value has changed on the river in Chicago, when this building was first built in the 70s, there were no windows on this side of the building. That's because this side is facing the river. Back in the day, when you built on the river in Chicago, you didn't want to have to look at the river. You didn't want your customers to have to see the river either. It's polluted, it was filthy. So they'd seal the wall that faced the river completely off from view. This is so common to do in Chicago, they gave it a name like it was a method of architecture. They called it back to the river. As you can see, tune's changed. It's covered in windows on this side now, and it's actually illegal to build on the Riverwalk in downtown Chicago and not have the Riverwalk you built be public. That might be confusing after I say this next bit, because if you look to the left, that's a gated community on the river in downtown Chicago. Now, the reason I say that's confusing, it just said your Riverwalk has to be public. How can this place be gated? Well, it's called Kinsey Park. It is a gated community, but they only close the gates at nighttime. They open them up to the public during the day, so you can walk on the Kinsey Park Riverwalk. I'm going to warn you guys, though, if you do decide to walk on that Riverwalk legally while you're there, you cannot call the place a Riverwalk. You have to use the proper term. You have to call it a promenade. Gonna use the fancy word, y'all. It's gated luxury. Gotta fit in, right? Now, past the bridge on the right-hand side, you're going to see a shorter red brick building with these black balconies kind of hanging off the side of it. This building is called the Chicago River Loft, and it's a prime example of something called adaptive reuse in architecture. And it's essentially like recycling an old building. This is an old raw paper material warehouse that has been converted into loft-style apartments. Now, a big indicator of an adaptive reuse apartment building is the balconies. Notice how each balcony has these 2 little rope-like supports, kind of like they're hanging off the side of the building. If you notice balconies like that, it means they were added many years after the building's original construction. And you can walk around any major city for more than 10 minutes, you'll see a lot of apartment buildings with balconies like this, because this makes financial sense. You don't have to knock down a whole building and build up something new. You just have to redesign it. It's called adaptive reuse. And y'all can take that one home with you. If you're walking downtown with your friends, you notice an apartment like that with the hanging off balconies, just telling you, it's called adaptive reuse. It's whenever they're recycling an old building, you can tell by the hanging off balconies. You can make them think you know a lot about architecture if you don't already. Now, also, feel free to use any of the info I say on the boat ride today. I don't own it. Now, ahead of us on the right, past the bridge, you're going to see a park. Now, this park is called Aaron Montgomery Ward Park, named after the founder of the Montgomery Ward Catalog Company, one of the many catalogs used to be based in Chicago. But what I really want to talk about here is this building in the center of the park. It's this trapezoid-shaped building with these white lines wrapping around it. That building, it's called Kingsbury on the park, and as we keep moving forward, you'll see right next to it, right next to us coming into view, is a rectangular shaped building, but it has the same white lines wrapping around. That one is called Erie on the Park. Kingsbury and Erie on the Park were both designed by Lucien Lagrange in the 1970s, and they are both the European industrial style of architecture. Now, what sets the European industrial style apart from a lot of other architectural styles is the white lines you see on those 2 buildings. Those white lines are the metal framework of the building. They're what holds the weight of the building up. In most modern buildings, they do have metal framework, but usually you don't see it. It's covered up, it's clad over, but you do see it on Kingsbury and Erie on the Park. This is intentionally done. It is made to make the building seem as if they're unfinished, like they're still getting constructed. Now, moving back to the left, really the next thing I'm talking about is not on the left, it's directly in front of us. It's that large brick building where they print the newspaper, the Chicago Tribune. Now that printing press in there is so large it's built into the foundation, and it can print over 70,000 newspapers every hour. Now obviously we don't need 70,000 newspapers every hour for one company anymore, so it's shared amongst 4 other newspapers, including the New York Times. What I consider the most fun fact about this building is that a few years ago an article voted that building to be the 2nd ugliest building in the city of Chicago. Now, everyone's first question after I say that is most likely, if this building is number 2, well, what's number 1? What's the ugliest building? Folks, understand something about me as a tour guide. I would never do that. That'd be so wrong to disparage a building in such a way and call it the ugliest one. I'm just kidding. It's called the Thompson Center. Yeah, the James R. Thompson Center is widely considered the ugliest building in Chicago. And if you live here, you may have heard the name the Thompson Center in the news a lot over the last year, because last year Google bought the Thompson Center. They were going to renovate it, and about 3 months ago they said, no, we're going to knock the whole thing down. And about 2 months ago they said, no, we are going to renovate it, and the renovation plans have been released. So they are going to renovate this building. Now, architects think this building's really ugly. If you want to hear my personal opinion on the Thompson Center, it is my favorite building in Chicago. But the reason architects think it's so ugly, one big reason, it's colorful. It's covered with a bunch of red, blue, and silver paneling wrapping around the outside of it. It's also in a really weird shape. 2 corners of the Thompson Center look like the tiered structure of an Aztec pyramid. One corner's in the shape of a cone, and one corner's in the shape of like a slice of cake. It is very bizarre. We were just dying to see this building now. It's actually a stop on the blue, pink, brown, purple, and green line trains. It's the Clark and Lake stop downtown on the L line, so if you're running the L near Clark and Lake, hop off. You can see the ugliest building in Chicago. The reason I spend so much time talking about that building, even though we don't see it on the boat ride today, aside from it being my favorite one in Chicago, is that segues to a suggestion. The Thompson Center and its architect, Helmut Jahn, have a whole wall dedicated to them inside of my favorite museum in Chicago's architecture section. If you do one more thing when you visit this city, my biggest recommendation would be go to the Art Institute of Chicago. The Art Institute is one of the best art museums in the country. It is one of the best art museums in the world. Whenever I say those 2 words, art museum, if your first thought is, well, I don't like art museums, if you've not been to the Met in New York City or the Louvre in Paris, go to the Art Institute. It will change your mind about art museums. Currently by Vincent van Gogh, there are 3 paintings by him. One of his self-portraits, the first painting he did of the view from the bedroom in sunflowers, is on display there. They also have stuff by Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dali, George O'Keeffe, she was a student there, Frida Kahlo, Claude Monet. A lot of famous Salvador Dali. A lot of famous people have their work on display at the Art Institute. Seurat, Hopper, 2 really famous by those 2 people. 2 famous paintings I want to recommend to see, check out. Nighthawks is on display there. That's the